Hi everyone, welcome to the Playwright Brownbag. My name is Thomas. We only have half an hour, so let's dive in. I want to start off with not really a rant, with a few challenges that I've run into the couple of years. Testing is hard. Let's face it, everybody knows it. We don't have to lie about it. It's not always easy peasy lemon squeezy. Testing is hard. The first challenge that I've run into is tests are slow. If you ever had to write an end-to-end test that goes to the functional flow, it can take up more than a minute to execute it. Sometimes even longer. I've seen half an hour. I've seen a test almost an hour. For example, an end-to-end test, it can take longer because there are a lot of dependencies. There are in an application multiple pages to be loaded. You might want to go from screen A to screen B just to check something. There are a lot of waits happening. That's why tests are slower. The second one, tests are flaky. Mostly in UI tests, I've seen this. If you want to test, for example, a contact page, you want to check if a button is visible, but you need the page to be loaded first. Oftentimes, mostly poor networking setup or networking issues can cause a test to fail because the page wasn't loaded in time. The test framework tries to find the button, wants to click on it, hasn't loaded yet, throws a timeout, mostly 30 seconds. Ciao, test broken. On to the next test. Tests require rework. That's something most teams forget. Sometimes developers choose to adapt a new library or need to do security updates, which require a certain feature to be completely rewritten. For example, a few years back, there was a huge JDK, the Java Development Kit security leak, which caused a lot of companies to completely rewrite certain features. A few companies also took that as an opportunity to re-evaluate certain UI screen, moved buttons around, etc., which of course have impact on tests. So the third one, tests require rework. That's also a challenge. Tests don't make sense. Sometimes tests do not make sense. If, for example, you're working on a project with 4 other QA engineers, and you didn't define best practices, or this is the way we're going to write our tests, everyone has another style to implement code. If you don't have a best practice, or if you don't sit down frequently to discuss this, it can be a lot of spaghetti code, as they say, which is very hard to read, especially for newcomers. If you're new on a project and you're not sure what the test does, it's most likely because it was written poorly. So tests don't make a lot of sense. Tests have a high cost. That's something everyone knows, but fairly addresses it. They have a high cost because there are tests take so long. I've had a project where the entire test suite took about 8 hours to run on the CI pipeline, which halted other jobs. and that can be a very costly affair. On the project, we used a cloud CI, so we had to pay by minute, which can bump up the invoice. All right, on to the next slide. The testing pyramid. The testing pyramid is a way to help you focus on getting the most value out of your tests. Meaning the lower you are in the testing pyramid, the closer you are to your actual code, and the faster they can run. The higher you are, the more complex the tests are, and the longer they take to execute. Let's start with unit tests. Unit tests are mostly developed by developers or engineers who write the code. They run very fast and they don't have any dependency, meaning they don't have a dependency on a certain database with data or an API server running. The second, component tests, is fairly new. The last years we've seen this grow. The idea behind a component test is that you take a small part of the UI, for example a button, and you mount that button into your component test, and then you can test only that component, so only that button. You can check, does it do what it needs to do if you click on it? Does it have a certain name? Is the color correct? Etc. etc. You can mount just a component from an entire application in a component test. API tests. These are tests that do have a dependency, meaning networking. If you want to test APIs, you have to make a certain request over the network in order for the API server to respond to you. So if I send a hello request to an API server, it might send me a request back over the network saying hello Thomas. So API has a dependency. And then something at the very top, GUI tests, graphical user interface tests. Oh boy, where to begin? These have always been a bit more complex, a bit more brittle. They have a higher chance of breaking, and they have a lot of dependencies. An example scenario I have in mind is I log into the application, I click on a button, I have to wait a few seconds, or I have to wait until the page is loaded. Then I want to click on a link that goes to the contact page. I have to wait again for the page to load. Then I see a content screen, a contact form. I fill in the contact form. I want to click on the button send, and then I have to wait again. And it's not always clear what this wait is. I'm looking at everyone. I've done it as well. Have you ever done wait 5000? No. Some of you might have. I think we all done it. A hard to wait, as they are called. I've recently saw a wait for 12 minutes, which is really long. Long story short, we should always aim for more stable and easy tests to maintain. Easy readable, really stable tests that make sense, that are less likely to break. Don't overcomplicate with dependencies, etc. Playwright is very new, developed by the best division at Microsoft. I say the best division because I'm a huge fan of Visual Studio Code and TypeScript, which is also created by that division. It's open source, so at the moment there's no licensing required. It uses the browser via the debug protocols. I'm not going in depth about what that does. Just remember that it's really fast. Oftentimes it's double the speed of a test that uses Selenium to run, which is really fast. It works with Google Chrome, Edge, Safari, Firefox, but it uses their parents. So instead of Google Chrome and Edge, it uses Chromium, which is the parent project of those two browsers. Firefox is a standalone, and then WebKit, it uses WebKit instead of Apple Safari to tests, which allows tests to be more efficient, to be more quicker. You can, if you want to, choose to run your test directly against Google Chrome, Edge, or Apple Safari. That's just a setting you will have to change. Playwright has a lot of nifty features. For example, automatic weighting, test generation, and UI mode, which we'll see in the demo in a few minutes. You can use UI and API tests together, meaning if you go to a contact page and you want to fill in the form, you can first, for example, make an API request to fetch dynamic data that you can then use in the contact form, fill it in, and then send. That's all really cool, but what's really cool is that Playwright has different bindings for different languages. So for example, Java, Python, C#, and JavaScript. And what's really cool about that is we've all been on different projects over the years. Some teams use Java, other teams use C#. You don't want to be locked in with a certain certain language, and teams don't want to use don't want to learn a new programming language just to use an automation tool. So it's really cool that Playwright has different bindings for those languages, meaning that a Java team doesn't have to learn a new language in order to use Playwright. So a bit behind the scenes, unlike other test automation tools where they reuse a certain client, Playwright uses one client with different contexts. I don't know if there are any Selenium users, but in Selenium, if you run a test, it's within a client. And if you run a second test, or if you have parallel testing enabled, it keeps opening a client. And oftentimes you have like 7 or 8 different windows running of in this example Chromium, which can be a bit frustrating. Playwright does this the other way. Playwright uses one client with different contexts, meaning your test is still isolated within a context, but that context can live next to other contexts in the same client. Without going into deep how it works, this is kind of explained really quickly. The tool comparison. Here you see Selenium, Cypress, and Playwright next to each other, where you can see that Selenium is still very popular among testers, Cypress is very popular among developers, and Playwright is gaining a lot of popularity, especially the last 2-3 years. It's been a roller coaster to the moon, as they say. Yeah, I'm not going into in depth about this grid, but you can have a look for yourself. We'll just move on to the next slide, which is the demo. So we'll put the slides away and then open our terminal. If I then want to I have a folder. If I look, it's an empty folder, and if I want to install Playwright, I would do so using the command line npm init playwright at latest. So I want to install the latest version of Playwright. If everything goes correctly, it should prompt me with a few questions. Do you want to use TypeScript or JavaScript? I want to use TypeScript. Where do you put your end-to-end tests? I will keep as default tests. Do you want to add GitHub Actions? No, for now. Would you like to install Playwright browsers? Note, these are the browsers, the parent projects. So yes, I want to install these. And if everything goes correctly, it should say happy hacking at the bottom. If I open this in Visual Studio Code, I can check the code. Let's see, it created a package.json for me. It also created config. In this config, I can see that by default, Playwright runs in parallel. I can disable or enable this based on your requirements. By default, it's true. And if I take a look at configure project for major browsers, I can specifically say I want to use Microsoft Edge. Also depends on your requirement, but by default it runs tests against their parent projects. So it runs your tests on Chromium, Firefox, and WebKit. If I look at such a test, I can see in the example.spec that they provide for me, there are two tests, one that goes to playwright.dev and then checks if a certain title is present and expects that title to be Playwright. Another test is to go to playwright.dev, then click on a certain element, click on a link with the name get started, and then expect a certain heading to be installation. If I go back to terminal, I can run these tests using npx playwright test. I will copy this and paste it here, run, and I can see running 6 tests using 5 workers. The 5 workers is the parallel part of the configuration, which is by default enabled, and 6 tests because there are 2 tests written, and I want to test these on 3 different browsers, so 6 tests in total. If I take a look at the report Playwright provides me, I can run this real quick and then open Safari, enter the report dashboard, and I can see all tests have passed. 2 on Chromium, 2 on Firefox, and 2 on WebKit. So that's all as expected. In the slides, I've talked about code generation, which is something that Playwright provides out of the box. I can open this tool using npx playwright code gen, and if I paste this and enter, it opens 2 screens. Let me redirect my screen so you can see. It opens a web browser and it opens a side window which is called the Playwright Inspector. Let's open that up a bit. Alright, so how does this work? It's basically a click and record tool. By default, it's also recording as we speak. And it only records certain steps when I do them. So for example, if I go to 𝗕𝗏𝐻𝗶𝗴, enter, you will see that it automatically awaits page go to 𝗕𝗏𝐻𝗶𝗴. If I then click on cases, it adds that certain action to the code. I can then again click on coaching, for example, and then I can click on this in the pocket. And then I see that I come to the case in the pocket and I go to a certain page. If I then switch, instead of clicking, I want to assert something, I can click on this icon that looks like an eye, and then it changes from red to blue, meaning I can now assert this heading. If I click on it and check the code, you can see await expect page heading to have client case in the pocket. So very cool. If I want to do a certain action on the page without recording, I can just simply pause the recording, click on solutions, bright scan. Why consider bright scan? I can do something functional. I can see if something is wrong, or if I want to debug something, and then I can turn it back on. If I want to go further, I can click on about, etc. So very cool, the code generation. If I exit this, and then I go to the next one I wanted to show is the interactive UI mode. Also very cool. If I copy this and I paste it in, it opens the Playwright UI tool for me, which is basically a debugging tool that helps you check why a certain test failed or what does a certain test do. Without looking at the code, you can visually see what's happening. So if I want to run all tests, it just takes half a second. All right, I can see that the tests are done. My first test has title. And then I can go back what's happening, how can I debug. So if I go to the first step of this test, I can see in code we are here. Await page go to playwright.dev. I can see it visually on the screen, and then it should expect a certain title to be there. Very cool. If I look at the next test, which has a bit more actions, I go to playwright.dev. I can see that here. Then I find an element, get started, and I click on it. So you can see on the screen it is highlighted. It is also here at the bottom. I can even go further as to what's happening behind the scenes, etc. For now, this is fine. And then there's an expect a certain heading to have installation, which I can visually see on the screen as well. Let me close this again. And then we'll go back to the slides, Q&A.
I might have one already, Thomas. I recently heard that Playwright might also be used for component testing. Maybe you can share a bit about that and as an extra.
Yes, sure. Let's see, I will share my screen. All right. So what I always like to use is the Playwright documentation, and not just for Playwright, but for any tool I'm using. I always look at the official docs. For Playwright, it's playwright.dev, and then navigate to the docs. The question was component testing. That's something new. So if I look in the Playwright docs and then go to the part components, which is still experimental, so it's fairly new. It's basically, the idea is that you plug Playwright into the front-end application. For example, let's say a React application. You can, if I will highlight it, so this is is well, the Playwright docs mocks this as a React component. So if your front-end developer created a nifty React component with custom styling for your project, etc., you can mount that specific component from React directly into your Playwright tests, and then you can have interaction with it and check if a certain feature does what it does without loading the entire front end or without loading the entire application. You can just load that specific component and then test if it does what it needs to do.
Okay, thanks. I see there's two questions from the audience. First one from Paul Beck. Can I log directly into the 𝐶𝑖M, SIEM logger?
Basically, can I log directly into Dynatrace or can I call APIs to put my logs in places?
Yes, there's also a small part about API testing, which can be used to send API requests directly from your Playwright test. So you would first have, for example, you can see here, this is the Playwright configuration where you would define a base URL and some authorization in order to connect to your API server. But if I scroll then down, you can see that in a Playwright test, I can await a request post, so I can post API requests within a test. So yes,
Brilliant.
it is possible. Yeah, I use it on the client by sending API calls to 𝘕𝗿𝐺𝐴. So we have direct input in our Jira. Functional analysts can have direct feedback about certain automation tests. So it's possible, yes.
Amazing, thank you.
The next question is, how does it handle multi-domain and multiple tabs? Cypress cannot. That is something indeed that Cypress cannot. If you in Cypress have a test and you're on domain A, you have a variable and you want to store it. If you then go to domain B, that variable is lost. In Playwright, it's not the case. Playwright handles multi-domain like one single instance. So you can reuse variables without any issue. You don't have to write a variable to a certain file and then read it again, unlike Cypress. I hope that answers the question.
Okay, next question from Frederick, I guess.
Yes, are the Playwright functionalities the same for every provided programming language, or is there a specific language that is always the first to implement new features and then the others follow later on? Yes, so it is developed by Microsoft. Their favorite language is Node.js, so features always come out on the Node.js version first. Then the Java and the .NET binaries follow, and then the Python. If you take a look at release notes on the Playwright documentation, let's see, release notes, you can track all the new features that Playwright releases. But JavaScript is always the first, yes.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. Thank you very much for joining.
Bye.
Bye-bye.